Fantasy analysts get a lot of things wrong, but we don't really necessarily talk too much about it. Much rather focus on when we're right, especially when we're right against consensus. But we need to be able to own when we're wrong too. And that's what we're going to do today. My guest is Addison Hayes from DLF. He has developed a model that helps him project future success based on how college athletes have performed, and it's not always right either. So he's going to discuss that, and I'm going to discuss some of my misses recently, and we'll do that next on Dynasty Compass. Welcome to Dynasty Compass. I'm your host, Jeff Blaylock, the other Jeff B. from Football Guys. Happy to be joined today by Addison Hayes from DLF, Dynasty League Football. Addison, thanks so much for stopping by, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me come on here. I know it's always fun to talk about rookies and stuff, and especially whenever you have the analytical view that I have. It's always good to dive into everything. But I think we've got a really, really fun show today talking about, some of the misses that a lot of people don't generally want to discuss because it might blow back negatively on you. But I think it's very important to talk about.
Yeah, I find people are going to call you a clown whether you're right or wrong. So you might as well admit when you're wrong every once in a while. Certainly, it's something I know J.J. Zacharysen's really good about. Kind of planted the idea with me is that you just own the ones where you had it just wrong, a wrong read from the beginning. So I appreciate you coming on and being vulnerable like that and sharing some of the things that we didn't get right. Because we don't always get everything right. I know for me, I do it more anecdotally. Like I know when I'm high on somebody and when they don't do what I want them to, they bust. And so it's kind of the ones I remember most. I do remember a few prominent ones that I was very low on and they hit higher than I was expecting. But you actually have grades that you have assigned. You've got a system and you've run it backwards a number of years, at least a decade, I think, to look at some rookies that your system would have been very high on. So you would have been high on, but yet it didn't work out for them. How'd you come up with that system that you've got?
So the marker system was my way of tapping into the modeling, prospect modeling kind of area. I come from a statistics background. That is my degree out of Penn State. So I could have gone the whole, multilinear regression or done all of that other sort of stuff and dove really deep into the weeds of an actual regression model. But I wanted something that felt a little bit more simple and easier to explain that a lot of other people could I could actually be very transparent about what's in it instead of just saying, well, my model and all of the different things that it weighs and grades it just spits out this number. I wanted to be this is exactly why these players are graded highly or not graded highly or somewhere in between. So what ended up happening was it created it's a series of check boxes, baselines, essentially, that I'm looking for players and prospects to hit based on what previously successful players had coming out of college at the respective positions. So it's not the same group of metrics that I'm looking at for every single position. Generally, it's the general same idea in terms of production, athleticism, and then a bigger weight on draft capital. But per position, I really dove into what metrics actually matter, which metrics, kind of showed more of a tendency to have a higher level of production from, NFL wide receivers, NFL running backs, all that kind of stuff. And then can we translate that into how prospects are coming out of college? So I started this in 2021. I kind of had the beginnings of it in 2020, but 2021 was really the first year, just running backs and wide receivers. And then I developed the quarterback and tight end one in 2025. So that one's relatively new, but and I iterated the running backs and wide receivers over the course of, the past few years since 2021. But 25 being quarterbacks and tight ends, even though this is year 2 for those positions, it still has a lot of the lessons and iterations that I learned from running backs and wide receivers. So I kind of was able to get, a running start with those two positions. And it so far has done, I think, decently well for those. So that's basically where all this is that the market system is just check boxes that, yes, they hit it, then check, they didn't hit it, move on to the next one. And you kind of tally it up at the end. And that determines if a prospect is, I guess, analytically good or not.
So in some respects, then it's a little bit backward looking. You're looking at their collegiate stats and what they did in their most recent years before they entered the NFL. Draft capital obviously is something that happens before you enter the NFL, but after college. And so this is not really so much a prediction of future productivity as it is a grade of how they stack up against other people in the position over the last few years who had similar or different metrics, right?
Sure. Yeah. Essentially, it's just like this is what, previously really good players at running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback now had coming out of college. They had, this degree of production, this degree of athleticism, usually drafted. Obviously we love first round draft capital, but you can slide into day 2 and that will be totally fine for the most of the positions, not quarterbacks, but running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, sliding into day 2 obviously is very fine. And then if you have that as a prospect coming out, now, then historically that has been a very good signal. If you don't have that, we've kind of got to, piece together what do you have and can that be successful in certain situations or, any sort of that sort of stuff. So it gets harder whenever you don't hit all the things that we're looking for,
right.
But it becomes really easy when you do. Like Jamar Chase, Jeremiah Smith next year is like I've already put together some of like the early 2027 stuff. Just like if these players were to have declared this year, where would they stack up? Jeremiah Smith is like a 99 final grade right now. So like there's no doubt about it. It's really easy when players are that good. And it just, when a player is 50-50 on some of the stuff or anything like that, that's where more of the discussion comes in.
Well, our purpose today wasn't to launch Tankathon in various dynasty leagues, but we may have just done that by saying that Jeremiah Smith is all the way at the top of your grade system. The system you mentioned has got performance aspects, it's got athleticism, and then, of course, draft capital. Why those, and what specific measures are you really looking for? Some across all positions, and as you noted, some are unique to one position or another.
Sure. Yeah. The production is pretty easy because you analytically that's basically what we're looking at is in the situations or the college teams that they were on, how did they end up producing? Because production largely is one of the biggest factors when translating into NFL production. It's just like not all high end collegiate producers produce at a high level in the NFL, but almost all high end NFL producers produced at the collegiate level. It's just a very easy translation. So, for, quarterbacks, I'm looking for, or I should say for all positions, it's basically some sort of a grouping of either best season and career production. And that is, again, also categorized between raw production and team adjusted or age adjusted production, depending on the position. So for quarterbacks, I'm just looking for some raw best season and career stats, basically to show that you have some level of experience at the collegiate level that can easily translate to the NFL level. When you kind of lack that experience, like historically 1-year starters in college are really rough translating into the NFL, but guys that are, multi-year starters, 2, 3, maybe not 4 years, because when you get too far, that in like a Carson Beck, for example, my argument against him this year has been, if he's actually was that good, he should have been drafted way earlier than staying, 5 or 6 years in school. So it becomes a tipping point at the end of it to where you can't stay in school too long, because that usually indicates that you weren't good enough earlier to have then declared and then produce in the NFL. So collegiate experience for quarterbacks through production, running backs, it's raw production too, but it's also like yards per team play, some modicum of receiving and receiving shares and stuff. Earlier production is always generally better from running backs if you were able to come in and be the team starter, maybe not as a freshman, but as a sophomore is super helpful, rather than being a guy that sits for a few years and then has like that 1 year as a junior or senior. That's still good, but not as good as somebody that immediately comes in and can start right away. Wide receivers, it's, breakout age, dominator ratings, yards per team pass attempt, market shares, all of that kind of stuff. Same for tight ends. Athleticism then after production. Obviously, you want to have some level of athleticism. You don't want to be, a 4.7 wide receiver or a 4.7 running back. But it's baselines, right? So that's why when people say that like the underwear Olympics doesn't matter, all of my athleticism numbers basically come from the combine, and then I'll fill in the pieces from pro days from guys that don't run at the combine. But it does matter to a degree because you need to see at least some level of athleticism. Now, do I care whether somebody ran a 4.38 versus a 4.48? No, not at all. I just need them to. Basically my measure is a 4.55, 40 or lower, and then like a 100 speed score. So like those aren't really tough numbers to get. Some players don't get them. Some players get them really, really easily. But it's just like I don't care what the actual number is. It just needs to be, in that range, essentially. And that's basically where we're at. And then, of course, draft capital is
draft capital.
It's the end all be all for a lot of players.
Yeah, that one's the easy one. You don't really have to do much to that. It is where they got their name called. It's interesting. You mentioned about breakout age a couple of times and producing early and coming out earlier, particularly with talking about Carson Beck. If he were really a hot shot, he would have come out earlier. I'm curious to see, and it's not a question you can answer today. I need to bring you back on in 3 years and see what you thought about this and how it played out. But with NIL being what it is and being such a force now with just the amount of money that these kids are able to make, as well as this transfer portal that causes them to change teams every year, what do you think that's going to do? What are your thoughts on where you're going to take your model with that as these two things kind of play out through the collegiate system over the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's definitely becoming an interesting factor. And even as I was kind of starting and iterating on this in 21, 22, 23, that was still being impacted by the COVID season that granted an extra year of eligibility to basically everybody. So players that could have been early declares just decided, hey, I lost a season and I might as well just come back and play another one too. So it is going to definitely be something that, I've already dealt with it through COVID a little bit, and we're still kind of feeling the effects of COVID, I think, for this 26 class. This one might be the final one, I think, where we really feel that. But dealing with that, then going into NIL and all that stuff. I heard JJ Zachariason talk about this, actually, and he said that through this whole new system, with players being more willing to stay, it might actually be more impactful that players are declaring earlier, because that means that there is a big enough draw and pull to the NFL based on their, level of talent and stuff, that we should actually care more now about early declares than we had originally. Now I do 100% agree with that, but I'm also willing to give a little bit more leeway to players that, like, if they're a fourth year wide receiver, had you been a fourth year wide receiver in the 2010s, that's like a horrendous hit rate. But now, 4-year, 5th-year wide receivers, we've seen some of these guys like, Zay Flowers was a 4th or 5th year, if I remember correctly. Travis Hunter was a 4-year player because of 2 years at JUCO. We've seen a lot of these other players now come out having 4 years worth of data. Jordan Tyson this year, my wide receiver 1, is a 4-year player. That's largely due to injury, but he's a 4-year player nonetheless. And so I'm willing to give a little bit more grace to those guys who, because it's especially being weighed down in like the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 type of players in rookie drafts, that they could be swayed to stay in college if they get, a couple $1 million of NIL versus going to the NFL, then try to raise their draft capital to then go into the NFL at a higher draft price and then make more money. So I'm being a little bit more lenient, but I'm also really interested in the guys that do end up early declaring, because that means that they're being told that their talent is too high, that they just can't miss out on the NFL. Yeah.
And I think, too, another interesting tension is going to be, and you mentioned it as well, you've got Carson Beck on the one hand, who stayed in college seemingly forever and played a lot. And then you have someone like Ty Simpson on the other hand, who started, I believe, 15 games in his collegiate career, who may have benefited from an additional year in college before coming out. So that, I think, is another interesting kind of tension that a model like yours will be wrestling with over the next few years, particularly at quarterback. Is Is it really good for them to declare early, or is it good for them to get another year as a signal caller, perhaps even at a different school where they have to learn a different system?
Yeah, I think, well, quarterback is very interesting because you want that level of experience. That's why, like, I was arguing all, like through the college football playoffs and the whole Dante Moore situation. I was like, I think he would benefit from an extra year in college because the NFL has really become hard to, truly develop into. Yeah, the NFL is not a league that really is in the developmental mode anymore. So if you're not getting that development and growth early on in the NFL, if you're a player that needs that, it might be more beneficial to stay in college. And I was in that camp with Dante Moore, and a Ty Simpson maybe would have also benefited from that as well. Now, Ty Simpson then also ended up landing in like the perfect situation to develop, where he could sit a couple years behind a Pro Bowl and Hall of Fame level quarterback in Matthew Stafford on a Super Bowl franchise with a Hall of Fame coach as well. So like he's in the perfect situation to where he just went right into the NFL and then is still going to be able to develop for a couple of years before actually fully starting. Not all teams or situations offer that though. Like Dante Moore, if he's going to go to the Jets or something, now it might be better. But if he was the Jets' first overall pick or something like that this year, what might have been a little bit iffier. Their plans might have changed depending on some of the other stuff. So it's just, quarterbacks especially, it's a very, very difficult position in general. So having that collegiate experience, which my marker system really, really favors, I think is just of the utmost importance.
I think you mentioned a few moments ago that you do make adjustments based on, their age, based on what the school's overall, if it was the school's overall offensive, character, or if it was the level of competition that they face. You talk a little bit about what kinds of adjustments you are making. These are not just the raw numbers that you're pulling out for production. You're actually doing some things to them.
Yeah, well, some of the big ones are, team level adjustments would be like a yards per team pass attempt for wide receivers, which I think is a very, very good level. It's a very good analytical metric just in general, just to kind of compare everybody on a fair basis. That obviously a wide receiver who has 1,500 yards on a team that throws 600 times is not the same as a wide receiver who has 1,500 yards on a team that throws 400 times. Like those are very different offenses in terms of volume. That having 1,500 yards is kind of a different. It's a different accomplishment having that level of production depending on the offense that you play in. So that's a big one. Yards per team pass attempt. You got dominator rating is another one too, because that's all market share based. And then dominator rating will feed breakout age. If you hit a certain 20% or 30% threshold for dominator rating, the first year you do that is your breakout age for wide receivers. So that's market share of yards plus market share of touchdowns, all that divided by 2. So the average of the two percentages. Those are two big ones. Yards per team play for running backs, essentially the same thing as yards per team pass attempt for wide receivers, just per play. So, and it's for the running back position, it's more of a measurement of how involved are you through the running and the receiving game, for your overall offense. And the more workhorse or bell cow running back that you are, the higher that number is going to be. And if you were just a specialty player or a backup, that number is going to be lower. So those are kind of the big ones. Age-adjusted production, that's kind of where breakout age comes into as well. But the team level stuff is definitely much higher of a signal because it is putting everybody on even ground and valuing every team pretty evenly, even though we know not every team is basically the same.
You come up with a number, it looks like between 0 and 100, although I don't know that you've gotten either of those. It sounds like Jeremiah Smith might get one of those numbers when he comes out. Is that final grade, is it just purely the matter of the math, or is there an additional judgment layer that goes into it once the machine spits out a number?
It's math. It's technically just a percentage. So there's for each position, there's an X number of markers. I think for quarterbacks it's 17, running backs it's 12, wide receivers and tight ends it's 14. So obviously you'll get a percentage of if a player hits 10 out of however many, that's a percentage right there that you could have as a final grade. I have one extra layer of adjustments on the raw markers, which is another layer from draft capital. So it's actually I can't remember if it's like a logarithmic regression or if it's that is where like my mathy statistics stuff comes back in.
So much for easy explanation.
I know. But it's essentially just like a curve to where it values the the first round, like top 10 picks, like 8th overall is not the same as 32nd overall,
right,
but they're in the first round. So if you just blanketly put a first round adjustment on everybody would get the same. But we know that a player drafted top 10, it's not the same as a player drafted 32nd. And a player drafted 32nd versus a player drafted 33rd, that's a first round versus second round grade. So that's a major difference if you were doing it by round. But numerically, they were just picked one pick apart, and they just happened to be 24 hours apart.
Right.
So the curve, the adjustment for draft capital is basically just a curve to kind of weigh that a little bit more, where you're weighing higher drafted players over lower drafted players, and then there's a sharp decline through day 3 and stuff like that. So that feeds to an adjusted markers, and then that adjusted markers is where the final grade comes from as a final percentage. So the players that hit on, we'll say 17 out of 19 at the wide receiver position, then that is, I don't know what that number is, like a 90% or something like that. But that'd be like a final grade of 90, essentially. Is it's just a final percentage on how you did after the final draft capital adjustment.
Yeah, I used to do a lot more mathing than I do. I didn't have a statistics degree, but I had to do statistics to get the degrees that I ended up with. So, logarithmic or log linear scale sounds about right for draft capital as an adjustment, because it's
somewhere in there.
It's got the tail, and then it drops down like that, and then it stays kind of flat. And I also thought, it's funny that 32 and 33 shouldn't make that much difference. And we thought one of the big differences is 32 is usually a really good team, and 33 is usually not. And I've wondered if that plays more into it than the fact that it was first or second round. Is just, if you go to a bad team, you're going to struggle more than if you go to a good team and they have an ability to play you right off the bat.
Sometimes it's not, though. What if those bad teams trade back up into the first? Then the good teams from the back of the first are sitting there in the more mid-30s. Sometimes it's not. So that's I don't take landing spot or anything into consideration. It's all just purely, here's what you did in college, and then here's where you were drafted. So trying to take situation out of it. But, of course, situation is going to feed, subjective rankings or anything like that more so than what I have, which is situation agnostic.
Right. Because, even on bad teams, players can have great seasons. It's just maybe a little bit more difficult, especially as you get farther down on the draft board. So, the model works. You've run through enough rigorous tests, and you've probably done enough regressions and other things on it to see that it's got the efficacy that you're looking for. Fancy words. Sorry, guys. And I should have trigger warning. There's going to be some mathing involved in today's show. So if you're still with us, just be forewarned, we may throw out other terms like that coming up here soon. But the guys who tend to do well, they score highly, do well, and the ones who don't. But there are some misses, and that's really what we are here to talk about today. Primarily, we've set up what your system is, and that it is, in a mostly objective way of delivering, a perspective, or at least how this person grades against other people who have come out of college at that particular position. It's not necessarily how they're going to do. You say landing spots not taken into account. So, let's start with some of the guys. We've set it up where you'll do some of yours, and then I'll do a couple of mine. So it's not just you who's admitting that you've got some wrong. I'm going to admit some too. And then we'll just kind of see what the lessons are from all of that. So I will just sort of let you drive from here with any names you want to bring up as the guys that were the misses.
Sure. Yeah. If you were to just filter, in the website that I kind of built out before the NFL draft, it's themarkersystem.com. There is a tab in there that shows you player outcomes, which is a really quick and easy way to kind of filter by the final grade, see how players do. And, as you mentioned, like generally the players that when you filter for, 70 and above, 80 and above, 90 and above, like a lot of those guys are the high level producers that we have known and loved for the past decade or so. If you filter down through the past decade of, some of the best players in the NFL right now. Jefferson, Lamb, Saquon, Bijan, Gibbs, like all those guys. Obviously, there are misses in there. I would be suspect on any model that does not have misses. If it's a 100% hit rate, something's fishy there. You should have misses, especially because the NFL has misses all the time. So even if you were to just follow the NFL, you're going to swing and miss on, a decent amount of these guys just because the NFL swung and missed on a decent number of these guys. So Corey Davis, I think, is the big one. Obviously drafted 5th overall in 2017. He had a final grade of an 89.1 and did not have a single top 24 season. He did have 2 top 36 seasons. I don't remember if they came. I think it was the one final year in Tennessee, and then maybe he would have had another one in New York. Can't remember, though. But he was basically like not anything in Tennessee for the first 3 or 4 years of his career. Obviously, major swing and miss. Now, he was a 4-year player, so that was, something was going on there that despite having 3 phenomenal seasons as a freshman, sophomore, junior, he did not decide to declare for the 2016 draft, and he stayed another year and basically repeated his 2015 season in 2016, and then declared for 2017 as a 4-year player. So 4-year player there. Also was a Western Michigan player, so that's small school, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, is like gaudy production from him at Western Michigan. His numbers were off the charts, but it was at Western Michigan. The level of competition that he would have faced would not have been the same as somebody that was playing at a much bigger school. So he was like a major swing and a miss from the system. Obviously, N'Keal Harry, I feel like if you just said who's the biggest wide receiver bust in the past 10 to 15 years, most people would probably point you towards N'Keal Harry. Maybe they'd say Laquan Treadwell or somebody like that. But like N'Keal Harry was, by all accounts, the best wide receiver in that 2019 draft, and was a major swing and a miss. So he's up there. He had an 83. You could look at the quarterback position, like Mitch Trubisky graded out as an 82. Zach Wilson graded out as an 82. Treylon Burks is another big one, graded out as an 85. And maybe you could blame injuries to some degree for his lack of production in the NFL. But man, that's not looking good. And it's kind of interesting that we've already mentioned 2 Tennessee Titans first round picks.
Yes.
Yes. So
I was just thinking the same thing. I see a pattern evolving here, emerging out of some of this.
Just don't draft Tennessee Titans. That's been a good motto so far. We'll see with Carnell Tate. Sky Moore obviously is another big one. You could look at Elijah Moore, Jahan Dotson. I don't know if you consider Charbonnet a miss. He graded out as like a 70, but doesn't really have production. I don't know if that's necessarily his fault, being behind Kenneth Walker's entire career. Rashad Bateman, there's another one. People will point towards Jalen Reagor, and Andy Isabella is another one in here too. Rashad Penny, J.K. Dobbins maybe is a miss just based on expectations. Cam Akers could be a miss as well, although Akers and Dobbins and even Penny feel like injury misses. Yeah. So there is some of that in there, but I mean, those are just some of the really, really big names. Like I'm just looking at players that are ranked or graded 70 and above. Mm-hmm. Oh, Michael Mayer's in here. Yeah, on this list. I haven't given up hope yet from Michael Mayer.
Exactly. I'm gonna put it incomplete on that one. Tight ends, we've gotten used to in the last few years, tight ends breaking out immediately. That is an abnormality when you look back over history. So we're gonna hope that maybe Mayer will break out at some point. If you've got him, hang on to him. You're not going to get anything for him anyway, so you might as well just keep him. But yeah, he's one that I thought of. And of course, Treylon Burks. That was another trigger warning we should have given before we got out there. I know a lot of people watching and listening have got shares of him over the years and regretted it from day one. And then you also mentioned the injury part. I mean, that's something that no model can really predict. I mean, I don't think there's any markers that you would have found in performance or athleticism that would suggest that somebody's going to get hurt most of their first 3 years of their career and not live up to their potential. But that still is something that dynasty managers face, because you still use a high draft pick on somebody and they don't live up to their potential because they're hurt. They still didn't live it up to their potential. Just wasn't as much you could really necessarily do about it. I mean, the model that you've got suggests that folks like Akers and Dobbins had the potential at least to be very successful. And we don't know what would have happened if they hadn't gotten hurt.
Right. Exactly. It could happen to anybody. And it's just Akers and Dobbins. I think it happened in like the same month too, I think, for both of them, didn't it? Because they're both from the same class, then heading into that 21 or 22 season. I mean, man, to just completely blow out your knee like that and then just to not ever come back anywhere. I mean, Dobbins, to his credit, I think Dobbins has been phenomenal, with the Chargers, with the Broncos. And so he's kind of come back, I think, much more than I expected that he would have, especially after his initial return in Baltimore. But still, I mean, just nothing compared to like what you would have wanted. I think he would have had an argument to have been the RB1 in that 2020 class. I mean, that was the Jonathan Taylor class. Right. That was also the CEH class, who got vaulted because of being drafted 32nd overall.
Right.
But, and Dobbins fell a little bit more into the second round. But, I mean, Dobbins had just about everything you could have possibly wanted from a running back in coming out of college. So did JT, but Dobbins was phenomenal, man.
Yeah, CEH, another trigger warning for folks who drafted him high, either kept him or kept acquiring him and kept hoping, and it didn't work out. And of course, now we've got a number 32 pick running back this year that may be in a similar sort of situation. Landed with the same, not the same team. It landed with a champion team, and that being Jadarian Price. What does your model think about him before the draft, and then if you know that, and then kind of where did he land now that he's gotten that first round draft capital?
Yeah, so I will say that I didn't have CEH like in my bust or miss list, I should say, because I was only filtered on players that hit a 70 or above grade. So even with the first round draft capital and the adjustment that Clyde would have gotten on that, he still finished with a 65 final grade. So the model didn't really like him all that much. And then the first round draft capital helped. It boosted him up because he should have been on our radar for sure after that. But still wasn't really enough to put him over the top of some of the other players in that class. And then ultimately was just kind of fine, but never really ended up doing much. So with that, Jadarian Price, very similar. Now, not completely his fault. He was behind Jeremiah Love for his entire career. And I'm sure you can make the argument that had Jadarian Price gone to, I don't know, Florida or something, and still had been in more of like an SEC, ACC situation or a Big Ten situation, and had been an actual starter though for a college team, that he would have much better production metrics. And I would tend to agree with you. I think that he's a better player than just being the backup to Jeremiah Love. But his production numbers in my modeling system, they're just not there because he was not a starter for his team.
Right.
So he finished as a final grade of a 57, which puts him in the same tier as, Casey Concepcion and Omar Cooper. Jonah Coleman is still in there. So that's a really interesting one where Coleman was viewed very highly pre-draft in my marker system. His analytics were very great as a starter for Washington, receiving back, goal line back, touchdown scorer, all of that kind of stuff. Then he falls to the, day 3. And so he's being dragged down by his draft capital. Price is being pushed up, and they're both almost identical in final grade, being, meeting in the middle here as a mid to high 50s overall player. So that's just kind of a fun discussion, I think, between the two, and we'll see how ultimately it pans out for both of their careers. But I'm willing to take the shot on Jadarian Price. I have him after all the wide receivers, and then obviously Jeremiah Love. I would take Mendoza over him in Superflex. So he's my 106 in Superflex, 105 and one quarterback. I'm willing to take the shot on him over Concepcion and Cooper and Sadiq and Stowers and stuff, because that first round draft capital is there, and I tend to believe that he is a good running back. Some of his advanced numbers point that way as well. But I won't deny it's risky, and it's a lot of projection. And historically, those late first round picks, especially like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, is kind of like the premier example. It doesn't always work out, even if the NFL believes it can.
Yeah, of course, Clyde Edwards-Helaire's landing spot was considered to be a really good one by Dynasty drafters at the time. It's a great system to land in. It's a really good offense, and it just didn't come together. The way I'm sort of approaching Price is, to me, he's almost more of a contender kind of a draft pick, because At this moment, he's basically slotted to be the starting running back for Seattle, potentially for the entire season, for at least 2 downs at a time. And that kind of production is hard to find from rookie running backs wherever they're drafted, wherever they are on the board. But I'm with you on that. I'm not sure what the long-term look on him is going to be. If he didn't have all this volume just handed to him right off the bat, would he actually be able to take it away from a healthy Zach Charbonnet or from whoever they draft next year or from the free agent running back they pick up in the coming years? So to me, he's kind of more of the contender play. What's your thought on that?
No, I mean, I agree with it. And you look at his age, he's, on the older side of 22. So he's going to be 23. I don't know if he turns 23. I don't have his birthday. It just says his name is 22 years and 7 months. So I guess I had 5 months from today.
Yeah,
he turns 23 in season, I guess.
Season.
So, we're talking about a rookie that is effectively going to be 23 years old. And then he's going to turn 24 in year 2. And as you mentioned, like Charbonnet's a free agent at the end of the year. So Seattle's going to have a decision on him, whether they retain him and then is Price good enough to beat out, Zach Charbonnet on a second contract, or do they look to the free agent pool? Do they look to the running back pool? Running backs next year, if Seattle were to kind of spend up again, it's a much better running back class next year at the top. So it'd be interesting to see what they end up going, or do they find a Bucky Irving type of player, or this year's Jonah Coleman, the guy that slips a little bit, right, and they're able to pick him up, and that guy's more impactful than we initially thought he would be based on the draft capital, or whoever the free agent ends up being as well. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that it can go south for Price, but I do generally tend to agree that he is much more of a contender option. And it's kind of annoying because he's being pushed up draft boards. So the players, like the teams that are picking at 4, 5, 6 might not be in that contender window to really benefit from a player like Price. If he's only going to give you top 12 or top 15 production for the first 2 years of his career, then he kind of dips on after that. So I don't know if those teams are really going to be able to benefit from that, like I said, or maybe he's just really good. He could just really super over exceed expectations and be, their long-term guy for the next 5, 6 years. That could be nice, but there is risk. There is risk.
The other thing I'd be curious to see, we were talking earlier about NIL being a thing that causes players to stay later and affect that sort of coming out early aspect of the model. Did we see kind of a sea change in the way running backs, aside from the very top ones, are looked at by the league now? And that if you don't go in that first or second round, you're kind of in this jumbled pool with a whole bunch of other people, even if you're a really good running back, if you're the third or fourth best one in a class. You think that's going to be kind of something that we're going to be looking at for several years, or is it just sort of a happenstance of the way this class just happened to exist?
I think it was basically how 2026 was viewed by the NFL. I feel like we've had this conversation, or somebody has at least asked this question within the Dynasty community, and each of the past 7 or 8 years, where we'll have a class where no running back gets drafted in the first round. There's only one in the second, 1 or 2, maybe another one in the third, and then most of the guys are fourth rounders. And then we'll be like, oh, see, the NFL is telling us that they're not valuing the running back position anymore. And then something always happens to where now running backs are being valued in the next draft or the draft after that. And I think it's just all dependent on the actual class and the players that are in. I mean, you could have asked the same question in 2024, right? We didn't have the first running back in 2024 drafted was Jonathan Brooks, 46th overall. We had to wait 46 picks before the first running back got taken off the board. Then we had only 3 other ones drafted in the third round, which was Trey Benson, Blake Corum, and Marshawn Lloyd. Then we had this slew of 4th and 5th rounders. That's where we got Bucky and Ray Davis, Braylon Allen, Audric Estime, Tyrone Tracy. We had a bunch of those guys in there that have all had kind of Isaac Garendo was on that list, Jalen Wright, Will Shipley. Some of these guys have had Kamani Vidal was a 6th-round pick, actually. So some of these guys have had really impactful seasons already, or at least stretches, or they're at least guys that we're interested in as handcuffs to starting running backs right now. But that was 2024, and I feel like you could have been like, well, if the NFL is not really telling us that they value running backs all that much until then 2025 hits, and in 2025 is arguably one of the greatest running back classes that we've seen over the past decade or so. Genty gets picked 6th overall. Omarion Hampton also first round pick. In the early second, we get Judkins and Travion Henderson off in the 30s. We get RG Harvey at the end of the second. We get Caleb Johnson in the third. Scadaboo and Bashal Tootin, they fell to day 3, but they were like 2 of the first 5 picks that round. We also got Woody Marks in the 4th round. We got Jaden Blue that everybody loved and was attached to as
another Kansas City.
There it is. So it's just Dylan Sampson was a 4th round pick. So, but like overall, if the NFL thinks that you're a good running back, they're going to draft you highly. Now we can disagree with specific players. Like I think Jonah Coleman is much more of a 2nd round talent than a 4th round talent. But, I also thought that Troy Franklin was much more of a 2nd round talent than a 4th round talent. So, and I swung and missed on him. Not saying that you're going to swing and miss on Jonah Coleman if you take him highly or want to bet that you're right and the NFL is wrong. I would like to bet that the NFL is wrong on Jonah Coleman. But, we've just seen time and time again that the NFL will value the players much more accordingly to how they should be valued rather than trying to like tank a position that they don't view as highly valued.
Sure.
You know what I'm talking about.
These players guy.
Right, exactly.
It's fascinating that 2024 class. I hadn't really thought about it, but it's something in our earlier part of the conversation. You had those 4 guys, 3 of whom have had chronic injury problems throughout their careers. Marshawn Lloyd's hardly seen the field at all. Jonathan Brooks has hardly seen the field at all. Benson has had opportunities to be the guy and has gotten hurt. And then you've got Blake Corum, who has been healthy but stuck behind a bell cow running back until very recently, where that split's getting a little more manageable, where he's getting enough work to be a flex candidate at least. But those were the top 4 2 years ago, and that's quite a all that, of course, not related. I mean, one injury wasn't related to another one, but just to sort of see that happen to that draft capital is a bit sobering. And then, of course, you said a second ago, if they really think you're a great great running back, they're going to draft you. Jeremiah Love is now the highest paid running back in NFL history, and he has the same number of NFL carries that you and I do combined.
That's right.
So, very, very interesting. We can, of course, debate whether that was a good move for Arizona or not, but that is nonetheless a clear signal that he was our running back 1 coming in, and he's still that coming out. When you're looking back at the misses that you've mentioned, you seen any patterns to them aside from going to Tennessee that kind of stand out, and you're now looking for these kinds of things in the markers going forward?
The small school one I think is definitely, especially from the wide receiver position. Running backs, it's a little bit easier to kind of, I would say the small school running backs don't generally get drafted highly, so you don't really like go all in on them and then they fail. And draft capital for running backs, I think is so much more important. Like the hit rate for a top 15 running back is just, it's like 95% or something ridiculous. Yeah. So like if they're drafted that highly, it's for a good reason they're going to be used. Wide receivers can be a little different, especially because all wide receivers can be utilized in different ways, and teams could have visions for how those players could get used as more of a X or a flanker Z or just a deep threat slot guy or, a kick returner even. Yeah. There's a lot of different roles that you can play on an offensive level, and teams will just go get those guys to fill those roles where they deem it best to take them. So that's why wide receiver gets a little bit more iffy with the draft capital. But I mean, yeah, just to answer your question, I think the small school one is definitely one of the more prevailing factors that keeps coming back up. When you look at like a Corey Davis or an Elijah Moore or Sky Moore or anybody like that, like Elijah Moore, sorry, went to Ole Miss, but Sky Moore for sure. Some of those guys just had some really, really gaudy numbers at a small school level, looked good compared to some other guys, and then ultimately didn't translate because they weren't playing against that competition level in college. So it was a much, harder translation for them playing against that level of competition in the NFL. Some of the other misses, No, I have like lists and stuff that there are these little signals here and there throughout the profiles that you can kind of point towards. A big example of that maybe this year would be the big run that we saw with career yards per route run versus zone. If you were an active Twitter user, you might have probably seen that throughout draft season. Was like people just recently discovered that this stat could be highly indicative of either elite production at the NFL level, or more importantly, could be highly indicative of a rough translation if you can't succeed against zone and at the collegiate level, and zone being the predominant 75-80% defense that's run at the NFL level. If you can't succeed against it in college, probably not going to succeed against it in the NFL. So that's, there's little signals mixed throughout players' profiles that I've kind of found and attached to their profiles to let me know, like, hey, just an FYI, this guy's got this, and historically that's pretty bad. So we see that with a decent number of the players, that even the players that I've graded highly and you could consider a miss, I can still at least point to a signal saying, well, if we had followed that at the time, and I'm trying to pay more attention to that kind of stuff as we continue moving forward. But and I try to learn from a lot of this as well. Like Ladd McConkey was a big miss of mine in terms of a player that I did not grade highly, who then over exceeded my expectations. A lot of film people were on him for sure, but I didn't see it analytically. And looking back on it now, it's kind of like, well, no duh, because he played with Brock Bowers, and obviously, if you had the choice to throw to Ladd McConkey or Brock Bowers, Bowers is going to win.
Right.
So, but Ladd did a lot of things well on a per route basis, and at the time, I was not really evaluating that and didn't have that in my process. So then that was also an introduction in 2025 because of Ladd McConkey, where I started integrating at the wide receiver position per route data. And then I started incorporating some of that more advanced stuff for quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends as well. And that's another one where, some categories and lists can be formed based on how players succeed on an individualized basis versus more of a season-long basis. And if those two match up, that's generally pretty good. If they don't match up, that could either be a positive or a negative thing, depending on which way they go.
Yeah. You mentioned, the film guys being able to see some stuff, particularly with McConkey, that didn't really translate from the numbers. And part of that was just, you're up against a unicorn for targets, and the unicorn's going to get targets. But, then the other fights that's been on Twitter for years has been analytics versus film, and your model's clearly on the analytics side. Do you think that some of the misses that your model had, do you think the film guys had something on that said, no, this is not going to, the stats, the numbers aren't what the real picture is. You need to look at this too. Or they have just made the same basic mistakes and landed on the same conclusion that your model landed on?
I would say that they're probably equal in terms of the amount of hits and misses that they have. And I'm sure that, they can identify players that the film overall was higher on than analytics missed, and it worked in their favor. But I think that same process could work in the opposite direction as well, of players that, film didn't really like, but analytics did like, and that worked out in the analytical favor. But I'm sure, if you're talking about Ladd McConkey specifically, as I mentioned, like film people were really on him. I believe Matt Harmon was really out on Treylon Burks, saying that a lot of his utilization in Arkansas was really rough and not something that translates well to the NFL level. And his film separation, all that just really wasn't all that good. So that would have been a win if you were on the film side of not liking Treylon Burks versus his overall production. That would have been a film win. I'm trying to think of who are some other maybe bigger names. I'm sure a lot of people really gravitated towards like George Pickens wasn't analytically phenomenal,
right?
Mainly due to injury. But obviously, if you watched him at Georgia, like this dude he's doing the same thing in the NFL now. It's just like the acrobatic contested catches are just all over the place. And I'm a Steelers fan, so I saw it all the time in Pittsburgh. And obviously, we saw it to the nth degree in Dallas. And I'm so frustrated that we ended up trading him for Drew freaking Aller. That's how the trade ultimately culminated, by the way. We got a third that we used on Drew Aller. So
yeah, well, you do. Hey. As of the day we were recording this, Tuesday, May the 12th, you still need a quarterback in Pittsburgh. So Drew Aller might be that future Hall of Fame guy. Probably not. but we won't know until we get
if
there.
If he turns into the next Ben Roethlisberger, I'm going to be so excited. But the odds that happens, man, and the fact that we basically gave up Pickens for him is rough.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think
yeah,
just going back, I think that there's a lot of things that the film guys can do really, really well. But I do think, not to I'm not going to call anybody out, but I think it's just the film community in general. There's some real blind spots, I think, in the film community for the analytical side. And there's blind spots on the analytical side for film as well that, a lot of people are just like, well, why would I ever watch film when the analytics are just telling me all I need to know? I do think that there is a small truth to that. I think that you can get to the bigger picture quicker analytically, but I think the film, especially if you have a really, really good process like Matt Harmon or, Jetpack Galileo from the FF Astronauts has like a very good process. Dynasty Nerds have a very good process with their nerd score. A lot of other guys that I could mention too. So like if you have that kind of rigorous process that you have created and honed in on, you could do really, really well. Just as the same if you have a really, really good analytical model like JJ Zacharyson or anybody else out there doing that you can get to these answers really, really quickly and have a really good hit rate. But then there's also, the other side where if you don't kind of have that process and you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants,
right.
You're not going to hit as many of these players as you might like or think that you do.
Yeah. Or if your definition of film watching is looking at the 3-minute highlight reel of their collegiate career, because obviously they're going to look really good at that. Nobody puts their terrible plays on the highlight reels or their bad route running or whatever it happens to be. And acrobatic contested catches. Well, it's either you're really good at that or you couldn't get open against collegiate coverage. And when you get to the pros, it's a good thing you can catch contested balls because that's what they're all going to be. Well, I promised some misses as well, so we'll get into those. You've actually rattled off quite a few of them already. Cam Akers, Traylon Burks. I at least on those, I wasn't on an island, so I don't know if that means I was particularly good or particularly lucky at just missing with everyone else on those guys. But there are some that I wanted to raise, and you actually raised one as not being as big of a miss as I'm going to call him, and that's Jalen Reagor. And that's he's a TCU guy, which I'm a TCU guy. If I had the wide shot on, you would see the TCU Horned Frog stuffed plushie over my shoulder.
There you go.
And that was the lesson there was what I just mentioned. I was more the highlight guy back in those days, and seeing, and of course I watched a lot of TCU play. But I only really noticed him when he had the ball in his hands, and that's the problem, is because he has to have the ball in his hands to do anything, and when he didn't have the ball in his hands, he didn't do anything to even try to get there. And so they kind of schemed up sort of offensive guys that get the numbers, that have the electric plays. How did they get them in the first place? If it was because it was a handoff jet sweep and just outrun the edge. You can do that in college. You can't really do that in the NFL. The NFL is much faster and much more onto that.
Right.
Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson, to me, were misses. Darnold at least has proven over time that he really did have it. He just landed in a terrible situation.
Don't go to the Jets.
Don't go to the Jets. Zach Wilson, same. So, an inept franchise, you said earlier the NFL is not really into developing quarterbacks. There are a few franchises that do, the Rams being one of them, so there's hope for Ty Simpson. But, yeah, landing with a team like the Jets or landing with the Browns that have just churned through quarterbacks, some of whom have done very well. Darnold won a Super Bowl. Baker Mayfield was right up there in the MVP conversations before. So there is hope. So Darnold was a miss for a while. I mean, he's not a miss anymore, but in the time frame that you and I typically think of for Dynasty, he was a miss. He was not good during that whole stretch, and Wilson's never been good. And then, Henry Ruggs, another guy that I was high on, and yikes. He's a freak athlete, 5-star recruit, fast as blazes. He averaged almost 20 yards a catch one year. He was great against press. He was great against physical corners. I'm sorry, he was not great against press or physical corners. That was one of the flags, is that he could be taken off the board very, very easily. And then, of course, he took himself off the board later in life with some off-field choices. But the other lesson there for him, was he was never the guy when he was at Alabama. He put up great numbers, but he was never the guy. And I think that's probably something your model, I bet, caught, because if you're looking at, the volume share and the yards per pass attempt, some of that was propped up by just the fact he had long catches. But I bet your score on Ruggs was pretty low compared to some of the other names we've mentioned. So you wouldn't necessarily consider him a bust because you didn't think he was going to be that good in the first place.
Yeah, he graded as a 60, really being vaulted up again by that first round draft capital. Like right next to him actually is Gabe Davis, who was the fourth round pick.
Right.
So Gabe Davis he had a bunch of production at UCF. So you could argue there's some, smaller school stuff going on there, but another example there. T. Higgins is actually not too far behind. That had Henry Ruggs fallen into day 2, he probably would have been closer to like a T. Higgins or a Chase Claypool kind of player. So he's just got vaulted up quickly because of that 12th over. He was the first wide receiver drafted in that
receiver drafted. Yeah. But the Raiders making another head scratching kind of first pick overall. I didn't think Ruggs was that good. But I did think he was better than Darius Hayward-Bay. So, improvement there. Same outcome, sadly. And then I'll miss the other direction too, which those don't hurt as badly. Dynasty managers generally, if you didn't invest low capital in a guy and he hit, okay, you've just missed him. Puka Nacua was that. And for me, it's because it was the worst Dynasty trade I've ever made is what led me there. I had my eye on him. I was in the 3rd round, and I traded that pick for Alan Lazard shortly after Rodgers had signed with the Jets. They had traded for Lazard. They gave him a lot of money. I thought they had decent enough connection. He's going to give me a decent enough floor. So I traded that 3rd round pick when I was eyeing Puka. At least the manager I traded to also has this same horror story, because he didn't take Puka Nacua either. It fell to the pick after that. My lessons there too on that one, if you have a shine to a guy in those later rounds, 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round, just take him. Just go ahead and take him. I mean, don't fret it. Don't try to outsmart yourself on, what the outcome might be. And the second is don't chase floors. Again, with those later picks, go for upside. And Puka Nacua had lots of upside. Everybody in the 3rd and 4th and 5th round of a rookie draft has the same floor, 0. But the upside is really there. So those are some of the lessons from my misses. Don't take guys that go to the Jets. Clearly, a wide receiver is going to Tennessee is problematic. So we will see if Carnell Tate can break that curse or not. And what I just mentioned, for Puka Nacua, as well as, schemed up touches and what that means. So are there any other lessons here that Dynasty managers should take out of the guys that we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes or so?
I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of rookie evaluation can really just be a crapshoot. You're just at the roulette table, just hoping that, it lands on the number or the color that you picked. And so, if you have a conviction, like you mentioned, like if you're really in on a guy that consensus is kind of saying like, hey, don't go that direction, and you go with consensus, and then consensus was wrong. Yep. You were right, and you went with consensus. You're going to kick yourself in the butt. Sometimes it works out to where consensus steered you in the right direction, but there's a lot of times where we also get it wrong, and again, because the NFL gets it wrong too. So if you have conviction on these players, go with your own conviction. At the end of the day, I try to just be here to be as informative as possible so that you have all the information that you possibly can. So that's why, like, I have Carnell Tate as my rookie wide receiver 3. I made a whole video post draft about why he's my wide receiver 3, why Tyson's my 1, why Lemon is my 2. And I wanted to just feed people that information so that, and a lot of people, there were enough comments in there that were kind of like, you've offered a different perspective on Tate that I had not heard, because it was just the whole community is basically just saying that he's phenomenal. He's a wide receiver 1. And you've offered this kind of alternative perspective. Don't know if people are actually going to, follow my direction or anything like that. I don't know if they're going to go with me or go with the consensus, but if I can at least get people to think about, what they're doing and not just, hit draft just because somebody's telling them to hit draft. I at least want people to form their own opinions, and I'm just here for the information side of it. So as long as you're forming your own opinions and not just blindly following everybody else, because a lot of people get stuff wrong. Everybody gets stuff wrong all the time, from the top to the bottom, all of that kind of stuff. So, I think especially from a rookie evaluation, make your own opinions, have your convictions, and then go with it at the end of the day.
But before we close up, I do want to ask about one thing. If you visit Addison's website, which is the markersystem.com, I believe the in front of it, so the markersystem.com, you'll see little things attached to some players like the Nacua list or NFL not for long that you've attached. What are these? Some are green, which I think are probably positive, and the red ones, because we're missing, so the red ones are the ones I kind of want to look at here. What are they warning us about? What is, if I see one of those red little labels on there, what am I supposed to be thinking about that, regardless of what their overall score or situation might be?
Yeah, so these are the categories that I had mentioned earlier of, I've found these little signals that historically could either mean, generally pretty good things or generally not so good things. And if those signals and future players' profiles pop up, that alerts me. And that's what all of these kind of tags or labels are on the site. There is a info button. It's kind of hidden. It's not really put in the greatest position, I think. But if you're just on the player grades page, which is the first page that pops up when you go to the site, there is a little question mark labels button that when you click it, it pops up with a modal that will explain what all of these are.
Okay.
And then it will give you like a list of who the players are that fall into that category historically. Now, a lot of these are just kind of through the past 8 or 9 years. A lot of it depends on more advanced analytics numbers that we don't have data for, obviously back to like 2010 or earlier than that. Like it starts at like 16, 17, 18. So that's why the sample size isn't as big compared to my entire database. But that's where all of this is. So that N'Keal Harry list that you mentioned, properly named after N'Keal Harry, it is a negative. That is where it's the inverse of what I called the McConkey list, which was based on Ladd, where that, as I mentioned kind of before, when you compare at the wide receiver position success on a per route basis from advanced analytics like targets per route run, yards per route run, first downs per route run, all that kind of stuff, compare those numbers to my season long production, which is through my markers. That is, breakout age, yards per team pass attempt, fantasy points per game, like all that kind of stuff. When you compare the two, generally they should line up to a certain degree. Not to say that you have to hit on the exact number of each, but if they should relatively line up. And if you're a little bit above or a little bit below, it's not necessarily bad. But if you're a lot above or a lot below, that is an indication. So the McConkey list is that you hit on twice as many of my advanced markers as you do regular markers, which means that you are way more successful on a per route basis than what your career or season long stats have shown. And that historically has been a pretty good indicator through the first about 200 picks or the first 5 rounds. So you could look at, obviously Ladd McConkey is on that list because he's
Ladd McConkey. It's named after him.
Yep. Puka fell onto that list. So have you used this to say, yes, I would like to draft Puka? Then that you could have gone for there. Deontay Johnson, Hollywood Brown, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle. Mekhi Lemon is the only player from this year that falls onto that list. There's some other misses like Javon Baker, Trey Tucker, Dwayne Eskridge, Paris Campbell are on there too. But a lot of those guys are lower level rookie, like thirds and fourth rounds that, and I've always say, like, if I got to miss on 4 Dwayne Eskridges to then hit on 1 Puka Nacua, like, sign me up, man.
I'll take it every year.
Every single day. But I think it's interesting that Mekhi Lemon is the only one that hits on this list and obviously is a consensus top 3 wide receiver. But that's a feather in his cap for looking really good. Now, the N'Keal list, as I mentioned, is the inverse of the McConkey list, where that is players that have half as many of my advanced markers hit as the season-long stuff, meaning that their seasonal production looks really good, but on a per route basis, their metrics are rough. meaning that maybe they were just fed a lot of volume because of the offense that they were in. Maybe they were just fed volume because they were a better athlete than a wide receiver. They don't have the per route success at the collegiate level that you would then expect to see a smooth transition into the NFL. And I'm only looking at rounds 1 and round 2 wide receivers. If you're a day 3 pick or anything and you're on this list, it doesn't necessarily matter. I want to know who are the top guys that don't have that success. And this has also been, so obviously N'Keal Harry, that's a big one, right? Because that's who the list is off of. Will Fuller, Denzel Mims, Jalen Reagor, Terrace Marshall, Tyquan Thornton, Jonathan Mingo, Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Legette are like the major names from that list. Yeah. Now, Michael Pittman was on that list as well. So had you used it to fade Michael Pittman, you would have had a better, you should have drafted Michael Pittman.
Right.
Tyler Boyd, Sterling Shepard. I don't know if you count them as hits or misses. I don't know. They're just kind of in there.
Because it depends on what you wanted them to be. If they wanted to be your wide receiver 1, miss. If it was your wide receiver 4, yeah, fine.
Sure. And then BTJ. So is the other, I would say is a hit just based on his rookie year, but I guess we'll kind of see if he continues to repeat 2025. He might like Kelvin Benjamin his way into being a list ruiner for future lists of wide receivers. Or he could just be, if he falls back towards the rookie version of BTJ, obviously he would be more of a success for that list. But not all of these lists are going to show 100% accuracy. Right. But they're just kind of there to point you in the direction of saying, hey, this guy has this. Historically, that's either been really good. Historically, that has not been so good.
Who anybody in the 2026 class, for those who haven't had their rookie drafts yet or doing a startup and will be looking at adding the rookies into their rosters, anybody in the 2026 class that maybe scored pretty well at the markers and maybe got great draft capital, but we should be approaching a little bit more cautiously?
Most of them. most of the players in here like this. So one of the funny things about this class is I have a class breakdown tab on the website where you can go and view like the average grade and the top graded players for each class per position. Mm-hmm. And 2026 is by far the worst average grade among the top 50 overall players. Like they're one of 2 classes with a average grade lower than a 50. And the other one was at a 49.7 and they're at a 46.9. So this class sucks. So it's not good at all. Now, if we're talking about players that have not great signals, the career yards per route run versus zone, that is a list that I have in here just because I found it's just a really, really interesting signal. And that, like, I talked to JJ Zachariason about it, and he was kind of not like pushing back entirely against it, but was just kind of like, don't use one number, especially a number where for wide receivers, yards per route run could be so dependent on the success and the talent of the quarterback as well. Because obviously, in order to have yards, you need to catch the ball. And if the ball is uncatchable more often than not, then you're not going to get the yards on those routes run. So that's a big one that Kevin Concepcion, so he fails to hit the even the lowest baseline for yards per route run versus zone. He's highlighted it, the label is called crushed by zone, where they have a sub 2.25 yards per route run versus zone in their career. Concepcion has a 2 or sub 2. So he's like not even like relatively close. He's like well below it. But I know Matt Harmon kind of went against it. He's like, if you watch Texas A&M, that quarterback is atrocious. The number of times that Casey was just open. He was dreadful. And yeah, I mean, you see it. If you just, I watched some of Casey's film. And it's just like that quarterback is awful. Had he had even a modicum of success, he'd been so much better. Yep. So that's the one where I'm kind of like iffy, but he has it on his profile. Denzel Boston is another one that has that on his profile. Jeremy Bernard, Jacoby Lane, Dazon Stribling. They all have that. Chris Bell is another one. Antonio Williams. They are all, Zachariah Branch is another one too. They all have that blemish of sub 2.25 yards per route run, which historically, if we just look at that list, I could read it off to you. Miles Boykin, Van Jefferson, KJ Hamler, Chase Claypool, Devin Duvernay, Josh Palmer, Velus Jones, Michael Wilson, Cedric Tillman, Roman Wilson, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Malachi Corley, Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall, Isaac Tesla, Savion Williams, Ty Felton, Matthew Golden, Kyle Williams, and then this year, all those names that I just mentioned, and Malachi Fields as well. And that is rounds 1 through 3 wide receivers with a sub 2.25 career yards per hour versus zone.
Yep.
So,
one of which was a league winner last year, because if you were lucky enough to have Michael Wilson, but I wouldn't count on that going forward. That was a breakdown. It took a lot of garbage. It took 3 years. It took a lot of garbage time. That he was a big recipient of that. So yeah, that's a cautionary tale there. A lot of highly touted guys, including by me. Matthew Golden will end up, if we did this show again in 2 years, Matthew Golden will end up on my miss list unless he gets it turned around. Coleman's another one. I was higher on this than your model was, and I'm going to be wrong. It looks like on both of those.
Yeah. For the quarterback position, I would say as well, Mendoza and Ty Simpson fall in that the NFL stands for not for long label. That is the for quarterbacks. I call it a green light, yellow light, red light label for quarterbacks, where it's essentially looking at their advanced analytics and their collegiate experience level based on certain passing metrics, like passing yards and pass attempts and stuff like that. Basically, do you have the advanced success and the collegiate experience to have a smooth translation into the NFL? It's not to say that if you were a green light quarterback that you're 100% going to hit. I'm looking at, that's a pretty good success rate, I should say, that most of those guys have pretty much been hits. Yeah. Red light, though, that basically means that you don't have the advanced success in terms of like big time throws. Is ADOT on there? Maybe interception sack percentage. I'm blanking on what all the other ones are. Advanced analytics for quarterbacks, essentially, though. So you don't hit on enough of those, and you don't have the collegiate experience for that smooth transition. So this list, you get Paxton Lynch, Mitch Trubisky, Josh Rosen, Sam Darnold, Dwayne Haskins, Tua, Mac Jones, Zach Wilson, Kenny Pickett, Stroud and Bryce Young, JJ McCarthy. Josh Allen is on that list. Josh Allen was an atrocious quarterback prospect, by the way.
Yes.
So if he was not on that list, this list would look horrendous. But the fact that he's on there at least gives you a glimmer of hope. And, Darnold, as you just mentioned, has shown that when he's put in the right system, that it was there. It just was not there in New York. But I think that's kind of an indicator that, these quarterbacks need to land in the right situations for them to succeed.
Stroud was pretty decent. Stroud was decent when his offensive line could block.
Yep, for sure. And Mac Jones, maybe, we'll see. He's kind of become the San Francisco reclamation project for Kyle Shanahan. So we'll kind of see what goes on there. But Fernando Mendoza and Ty Simpson fall into that category. So it's not to say that they can't.
Right.
It's just that based on their collegiate experience and their kind of lack of elite advanced analytics, that their transition might be rough. Now, Mendoza's playing with Clint Kubiak now, has Brock Bowers to throw to. We'll see what goes on there. Ty Simpson, as we talked about earlier, is in like the perfect situation to be the heir apparent to Matthew Stafford in a McVay offense, probably throwing to Puka Nacua at the time, maybe some other wide receivers. So, we'll just kind of have to see. But historically, it's not like they fall into like these uber amazing lists of other great quarterbacks that we've seen come out in the past.
Yep. Well, man, this has been a lot of fun, very insightful. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today. Before we go, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you and your great work that you do to make analytics approachable? Because I think we have a tendency in this industry to come up with weird acronyms and make it sound like we're dealing with wizardry when it's really just math. So you do a really good job of breaking it down, making it approachable. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This was, I always love to talk about advanced analytics and just regular analytics and the market system and everything like that. So thank you so much for having me on. I am at AmazeHaze _ on X and Blue Sky. Basically 99.9% of my work can be found on the DLF YouTube channel. Sometimes I will write in-season articles, but everything's basically over there on the DLF YouTube channel for Dynasty League football. And then, themarkersystem.com. If you're curious on what's going on with my modeling system, that is the website that I kind of generated up before the NFL draft. And all of the data is updated for post-draft 2026. So you could see where all the 2026 players are, where other players have landed historically in the past since 2010. So there's a bunch of cool little, ways that you can kind of visualize some of the data that I have in there and specifically dive into 2026 for your rookie drafts.
Yeah, definitely check out the YouTube channel. Great stuff there. And then themarkersystem.com. It's just a terrific resource. It's available for free. You just put it out there for all of us to use and use it as data points in our rookie evaluation. So that's outstanding to do that. And thanks everyone who has watched this episode on YouTube or listening to it on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform. Do us a favor and click the likes button, 5-star review ratings, positive reviews. If you put comments in YouTube, I respond to all of those personally. All of those kinds of little actions will help this show grow and reach more Dynasty managers and give them great advice and insights like what we got today from Addison. And we will have another guest next week who will offer a different set of insights, but certainly insights and insightful things. And that'll be next week on Dynasty Compass.